is the first of many such gatherings of 2017 for the Black History Commission of Arkansas, and hopefully we will all continue to forge important relationships, friendships, and opportunities as we share this magnificent symposium, Black Political Engagement in Arkansas. One cannot always tell the exact moment when friendships, opportunities, and relationships are forged, but this I can tell you, it is at occasions such as today when we come together to share a common celebration, goal, and vision that we often start or continue on our journey towards something remarkable. And if guests like you are flowers, well, then you'd be the exact bunch that I'd pick. May we all value, cherish, and gain something of importance from the time that we spend here together. May we grasp it with both hands and make our own memories and opportunities to carry with us in the days, weeks, and months and years still to come. Let me thank the Mosaic Templars this morning, the Mosaic Templars Cultural Center and Museum Director, staff, and others and volunteers for helping us here today, and their partnership with the Black History Commission of Arkansas, the Arkansas State Archives, ASA. Somebody brought that to my attention, ASA. Dr. Spear, who is the director, right there, thank you, and her loyal staff for being here today. Our speakers of the hour, thank you. And commissioners in attendance, Dr. Sharice Jones-Branch, raise your hand. All right. Dr. John Graves, who is our vice chair of the Black History Commission of Arkansas. Elise Hampton, all right. Is Mr. Myron Jackson here? Reverend Frank Stewart. And I am Carla Hines Coleman, chair of the Black History Commission of Arkansas. Welcome and thank you all for coming. We have a little house rule. Oh, let me give you just a little education about the Black History Commission of Arkansas. Act 326 of 1997 requires the Commissioner of the Arkansas Department of Education to oversee the dissemination of instructional materials and training for the teaching of African American history in grades K through 12 in Arkansas public schools. Bet y'all didn't know that, did you? The act further directs the commissioner to establish a 7-member task force, and that's what we used to be. We used to be a task force. It was the Black History Advisory Committee, and Mr. Curtis Sykes of North Little Rock was the chair then, and there were appointed 7 educators of the task force, and this established the Act of 326 of 1997. And the members then were Dr. Newby Williams of Fayetteville. He was the chair. Miss Thelma Bryant of Helena, West Helena School District. Miss Irma Franks, Little Rock School District. I think she's still with the Little Rock School District. Miss Judy Mackey, Fayetteville School District. Miss Kelly McCabe, Conway School District. Miss Carol Neves, Jonesboro School District. Miss Nakia Williams, Helena, West Helena School District. So that's a little history of how we became and who we are now. We have some housekeeping rules. Please silence your cell phones because we're videotaping this morning. And we will have, during our question and answer session, Will you please speak into the microphone? Wait on the microphone because, like I said, we're videotaping, and you can get these videos at a later date. Please fill in your evaluation form that's in your packets. We need your feedback. It's very important on planning events like these. Ms. Tiana, raise your hand. Okay. That's who you will see. She has your teacher certificates at the end of the day. You'll have, at the end of the day, 2 hours. Full day is 4 hours, so they get 4 hours.
2 hours, they stay half of the day. They get 2 hours, they stay for the entire symposium.
Okay, did you all hear that? Okay. Some of you may have registered after the deadline. You were informed that you would be responsible for your own lunch. However, if at the time lunch is served and those who registered have not shown up, you will be allowed to have that lunch. Thank you for understanding these matters. Thank you all. Now Ms. T will come.
Good morning, and again, thank you all for coming. Just seeing your wonderful faces makes my day awesome, because it's hard to plan a symposium like this, but when people actually show up, it puts a smile on my face. As Carla said earlier, we have commissioners, the Black History Commission of Arkansas, and those who have been to our symposium before know that we lost a commissioner, Ms. Joyce Gibson. Her picture is right over here, and we just want to take a moment to remember her, because she was an awesome individual. If you knew her personally or professionally, she was like a mother to me, because I only knew her for 4 years, but her impact on my life was awesome. So I just want to read her obituary for this moment. Joyce Sugar Baby Holden was born in Dumas, Arkansas on February 4th, 1947. She graduated from Reed High School and attended Arkansas A&M College, now known as UAPB, where she received her degree in education in 1968. She completed postgraduate work at Henderson State University and the University of Central Arkansas. Joyce was a member of the Macedonian Baptist Church in Prescott, where she remained active until she returned to Dumas to care for her mother. She taught home economics in Prescott School District, where she retired in 1999. Upon her retirement, she became the librarian for the Nevada County Library and was extremely proud to be a part of the construction and opening of the new Prescott Nevada County Library, an educational facility. She retired from the library in 2010, but remained very active in promoting literacy and history in Southwest Arkansas. She is survived by her mother, Vertley Lacey Holden, 2 daughters, Regina Level Gibson and Terry Camille Gibson, Todd Gerald, both of Little Rock, and her grandson, Jared Holden Todd, whom she affectionately is known as Joy Joy. Although she was an only child, George was a host of aunts, uncles, cousins who are close family and will cherish her memory. She was preceded in death by her father, George Holden, and her husband of 44 years, Lavelle Gibson. Always willing to serve, Joyce was a member involved in numerous organizations, including Prescott Club, Arkansas Black History Commission, Southwest Arkansas Regional Archives, Sarah Foundation, Friends of the Library, Southwest Arkansas Regional Library Board, the Arkansas Retired Teachers Association, Delta Kappa Gamma, the National Education Association, and the Arkansas Education Association. Joyce was the ultimate cook and gracious host, and loved her role as a daughter, mother, grandmother, and a socialite of Prescott. She gave of her time, talents, and resources unselfish, and others would not be in need. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. One of my greatest joys that I have as director of the Arkansas State Archives is the opportunity to work with our commissioners on the Black History Commission of Arkansas and the Arkansas History Commission. In the almost 4 years that I've been here, they have provided tremendous support and encouragement to me. And it's a privilege for me to continue to be able to work with these groups in seminars like this and in all of the ways that they support the activities of the State Archives. I'd like to mention that we also have 2 former members of the Black History Commission who've slipped in under the radar. I don't think Carla knew they were here when she was welcoming folks. Marion Butler, former member of the Black History Commission, and James Lawson is also here. And wonderful to work with them, and we miss them very much on the commission. We also have 2 members of the Arkansas History Commission with us, Dr. Robert Shearer and Robert McCarley. We also have with us this morning the new president of the Friends of the Arkansas State Archives, Mrs. Susan Boyle. For those of you who may not know, a little over a year ago, the Arkansas State Archives launched, some interested parties in the historical and archival community in Arkansas launched a Friends group for what was then the Arkansas History Commission and is now the Arkansas State Archives. And over the last year, they've been working to build membership and develop bylaws, and they've sponsored several events for us, a legislative breakfast, our recent lecture series that we debuted at Historic Arkansas Museum in January. They're growing their membership, and we're really excited and grateful to have a support group dedicated to advocacy for us, as well as providing funds for our events and our staff professional development. Their membership dues are very nominal, so if you are a friend of history and the State Archives, is something you consider a benefit, I hope you'll talk to Ms. Boyle about membership and how you can get involved as either a member of the Friends group or a volunteer at the State Archives. I know she'll be happy to share information with you. It's my privilege this morning to introduce our first speaker, Dr. John William Graves. Dr. Graves has taught history and political science courses at Henderson State University since 1985. He received his PhD degree in history from the University of Virginia and his MA and BA degrees in history from the University of Arkansas. A native of Little Rock, his principal area of scholarly specialization has been the study of race relations in Arkansas during the latter half of the 19th century and the early 20th century. Graves was also, in 1992, a founding member of the Mosaic Templars Building Preservation Society and has served continuously on its board of directors since that time. Graves has served on the official State of Arkansas Advisory Board of the Mosaic Templars Cultural Center, and in addition, he is a member of the Black History Commission of the State of Arkansas. He's also a past president of the Arkansas Historical Association. In recognition of the above activities, he was recently awarded his department's first endowed named chair, the Edgar and Marguerite Henley Professorship in American History. Please welcome Dr. John Graves.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning, and thank you, Dr. Spear, for that very nice introduction. I'm sure you know the title of my presentation on the agenda is listed as John Gray Lucas, Pioneer Champion of Civil Rights. And I suspect if you're probably like most Arkansans, you may have asked, well, who is John Gray Lucas? And frankly, that was my first reaction too when carrying out research concerning the origins of Jim Crow segregation practices in Arkansas. I first came across his name. Unfortunately, that wasn't unusual. I began my research in the 1960s, and most of the prominent African-American leaders in Arkansas from the period of the Gilded Age, the late 19th century, people who had been very important players in Arkansas politics and society at one time, had been completely forgotten. There was, frankly, a kind of whiteout in the historical record. You just did not come across their names in any of the secondary literature. White historians that dominated the historical fraternity in Arkansas at the time just weren't interested in African-American history. I literally found not a single reference to John Gray Lucas in any of the secondary literature when I began my research. I have, as I came to know more about him, though, frankly, he's become one of my personal heroes. I think he was actually a magnificent person. He was living in a time when race relations were deteriorating, which must have been an incredibly discouraging period for him, but he managed to battle back against everything that was happening and personally overcome in his own life many of the obstacles that he and other African Americans at the time had to face. Well, based upon my research, I have found out quite a bit about Mr. Lucas. His death certificate showed that he was born on March 11th, 1864, in slavery in Marshall, Texas. The birth certificate lists his father's name, the death certificate lists his father's name as unknown. His mother's name is simply listed as Betty. At some point in his youth, and no one is really, hasn't been determined exactly which year, but at some point in his youth, he moved from Texas to Pine Bluff, where he attended the public schools, the new system of public schools that had been inaugurated during the period of congressional reconstruction in Arkansas. And then he had entered the Branch Normal College of Arkansas Industrial University, the forerunner of the present-day University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree from that school, and then he moved to Massachusetts, and he entered the Boston University School of Law in October 1884. He was graduated in 1887. He was the only African American in a class of 52 and one of 7 law students who were graduated with honors. While he was in Boston, he was interviewed by a reporter from the Boston Daily Globe, which is one of the leading daily newspapers in that city. And he was specifically asked about racial conditions in his hometown of Pine Bluff. Lucas responded with enthusiasm. He observed that in Pine Bluff, 3 of the 8 city councilmen were African American, and that African Americans held the offices of county coroner and county circuit clerk. He noted that African Americans comprised half the members of the local police force and half of the local justices of the peace, and often served on juries. In addition, he noted that a black entrepreneur, Wiley Jones, owned Pine Bluff's principal streetcar system. He also noted that on public carriers like railway and trains and streetcar lines and public carriers throughout Arkansas, there was, quote, neither distinction nor separation by race. Contrasting the lot of Massachusetts blacks with conditions in Arkansas, Lucas wondered why, quote, more colored young men from the North did not make Arkansas their home. It is an inviting field for them and a grand opportunity to make something of themselves. Lucas followed his own advice. He returned to Arkansas and was admitted to the Arkansas State Bar. Soon afterward, he was named assistant prosecuting attorney for Pine Bluff in Jefferson County. His abilities brought him to the attention of Judge Henry C. Caldwell, who appointed him United States Commissioner for the United States Circuit Court of the Eastern District of Arkansas. He also became very involved in local politics. In this era, the vast majority of African Americans still affiliated with the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, and really Southern Democratic parties were often not inviting to African Americans, so it's not surprising the majority of blacks in this era continued to vote Republican. Lucas was typical of his race in that respect. He was basically elected to the Republican state and county central committees and also served on the Republican 11th Judicial District Committee, Central Committee. Also running on the Republican ticket in the fall of 1890, he was elected as a state representative from Jefferson County. His service during the following year in the Arkansas General Assembly earned him a permanent place in the annals of Arkansas history. Entering the legislature at the very time that a new wave of racial reaction was inundating the South, he emerged as a leader among the legislature's 12 African-American lawmakers. This was in 1891. He is especially remembered in Arkansas history today for the trenchant and eloquent address he delivered in February 1891 against the Jim Crow separate coach bill that would mandate racial segregation on the state's railway passenger trains and separate waiting rooms in railway passenger stations. I might just note in terms of the genesis of this law, the motivations for it, I think, were to a great extent clearly political. The Democratic Party in Arkansas was in trouble at this time. Times had gone from bad to worse insofar as the economic circumstances of Arkansas farmers were concerned after the Civil War. I could give a whole day's presentation on the causes for this, but just very briefly, such things as deflationary federal monetary policies that were driving down crop prices and farmers' incomes, price gouging by railroads, especially in rural communities served by only one railway line, crop lien laws that basically allowed merchants to exact exorbitant interest on advances of supplies for credit. That and all these things in turn led to a vast increase in sharecropping and tenancy. By 1900, in fact, over 45% of Arkansas farmers were tenants or sharecroppers working on someone else's land. And of that 45% who were tenants or sharecroppers, 57% of them were white. In terms of their strictly economic circumstances, the conditions of a white sharecropper and a black sharecropper differed little. But when the Democratic Party in Arkansas, which really was dominated by economic elites in the state, at the time failed to respond or providing any meaningful relief, many Arkansas farmers decided to kick over the traces, and they organized independent third parties, beginning with the Union Labor Party, which was established here in Arkansas and ran serious contests for state office and local offices in 1888 and 1890. In fact, most Arkansas historians believe that the Union Labor Party candidate for governor in 1888, Charles Norwood, a kind of one-legged Confederate veteran from Prescott, almost certainly won that election, but was just cheated out of victory by massive electoral fraud carried out by Democratic Party election officials. When the Arkansas Republican Party, half of whose supporters were, at least half were African American at the time, endorsed the Union Labor Party candidates for office in 1888 and 1890, the effect of that was to create something entirely unique in Arkansas, a biracial coalition of poor whites and poor blacks. Certainly the Democratic Party chieftains and the conservative elites who supported them now face their most serious challenge since the end of Reconstruction. One way that they responded to that challenge was to play the race card and to try to change the political conversation away from economic and class issues by, again, kind of focusing on the hot button issue of race. And And one way of doing that, one way of trying to send the message that the Democratic Party was the white man's party, and anyone loyal to the South and the white race, any white person should vote the straight Democratic ticket. One way of kind of hammering home that point was to support the passage of new Jim Crow segregation laws. The Democratic State Party Convention in 1890 passed a resolution urging the next session of the legislature to adopt a Jim Crow segregation law for the state's railroads. And when the General Assembly did meet in 1891, it proceeded to do that. By the way, just to kind of indicate the tenor of the Assembly, that time, in one of his first actions, the members of the House of Representatives decided to remove a portrait of George Washington hanging behind the Speaker's rostrum and to replace it with a portrait of Jefferson Davis, the former president of the late Confederate States of America. But I think that in itself obviously kind of speaks volumes. But the legislature then proceeded to enact this separate coach law. The author of the law was Senator John N. Tillman of Washington County in northwest Arkansas in Fayetteville. Actually, several bills were introduced. The action of the Democratic State Convention had made it clear that some law was going to be passed, and several legislators wanted to have their names attached to the new law. But Tillman was chosen by party chiefdoms because he was from the Ozark Mountain country of northwest Arkansas, where there were very few blacks living. And there had been some fear that there might be some opposition to the separate coach law coming from that part of the state. So Tillman, a prominent legislator from that region of Arkansas, was made the bill's official sponsor. But the bill, again, basically required that there be separate coaches or passenger cars for blacks and whites on the state's railway passenger trains. It also required that separate waiting rooms in train stations be established for blacks and whites. And there were very stiff penalties, heavy fines, and even possible imprisonment for anyone who violated the law. Since Senator Tillman had introduced the legislation, it first came up for a vote in the state Senate. There was only one state senator serving in the Arkansas Senate at that time, Senator George Waltham Bell. He represented Chico and Deshay counties in far southeast Arkansas. It must have been an awfully lonely position for him as the sole African-American serving in the Senate. But he was a physician. He, by the way, later moved to Pine Bluff, but he was a physician, sort of a gentle Quaker. He had attended Southland College in Helena and Phillips County, a Quaker institution, and he tried to appeal to the better natures, angels of the white legislators in the Senate. He basically gave a very conciliatory kind of speech. I'll just quote one section of his address against the separate coach proposal. He said, "But sir, I thank God that the day is fast approaching when reason and a proper regard for the rights and privileges of all our countrymen, North, East, West, and South, will be recognized, and that the races here in our fair and beautiful Southland may feel and know that we have a common cause, a common humanity, and a common interest. And if we would triumph over wrong and place the emblems of peace upon triumphant justice without distinction of race, color, or previous condition, we must unite and cultivate that spirit of friendliness which would make us one people in a truly solid South." Well, despite his eloquent, polished oratory, the bill passed overwhelmingly in the Senate Only one white senator voted against a Union Labor Party representative. From the Senate, then the bill moved forward to the House of Representatives. And basically, it was in the House of Representatives that John Gray Lucas really shone. He was selected by his fellow African-American legislators in the House to give the principal address against the separate coach law of 1891, or the bill that would become law. And you can't prove this absolutely, but one can't help but wonder, he had seen what had happened in the Senate. Senator Bell had extended the olive branch. He had tried to be moderate and restrained in his opposition, and as conciliatory as he could possibly have been. He had convinced one white senator to vote with him against the legislation. And one can't help but at least wonder, did John Gray Lucas decide, well, if this thing is going to pass anyway, I might as well be very honest and candid and speak my real opinions. But he certainly was very, he gave a really very eloquent and a very no-holds-barred speech. In his speech in the House of Representatives, and by the way, it was reprinted in entirety, verbatim, by the Arkansas Gazette, which was so impressed by the speech. But in his speech, citing Herodotus and Diodorus, the ancient historians, he recalled the earliest achievements of his race, alluding to the cities of Napata and Meroe in ancient Nubia and Kush, south of ancient Egypt. And he noted the mulatto character of much of ancient Egypt. He contrasted these early glories with the later debasement and persecution of his people in America, from the horrors of the Middle Passage of slavery times to the recent attempts to subvert the Constitution of the United States and the Civil Rights Amendments to the Constitution. Fortunately, he noted, Arkansas heretofore had been exempt from these latest developments. Harkening back to his days as a student in Boston, Lucas recalled his interview with the Boston Daily Globe, in which, this is how I found out about it. In fact, he mentioned it in this address. But he recalled his interview in the Boston Daily Globe, in which he had proudly declared that his state was an inviting field to young men where, quote, a liberal public sentiment prevailed and no hindrances were met with anywhere. But apparently some were determined to abandon past policies and instead transport Arkansas across the Mississippi River, where yoked to the crimson soil of Mississippi, she shall be as incapable of advancement as is a fixed star to alter its course. And Mississippi had just passed a similar measure just a year earlier. Taking up the separate coach bill itself, Lucas felt the whole social philosophy of its sponsors was contrary to the most advanced Western thought and the spirit of the age. In addition, segregation went against the grain of the fundamental American principle of personal liberty. It prohibits and prevents free men from the right to choose their own company, he observed, and argued that in essence its enforcement would create an unlawful imprisonment. Lucas then went on to give the classic African-American delineation between civil equality and social equality. Social equality was simply a matter of private relations between two or more persons. No intelligent Negro would expect social recognition or acceptance merely because he was a passenger on the railroads. Civil equality, however, was an entirely different matter. It was the right of every citizen to expect equal protection of the law from agencies licensed by the state to carry out public business, such as railroads and hotels. Lucas believed that the railroad was simply a peculiar form of public highway and held that it would be just as reasonable and proper, these are his own words, for the state to place a dividing line through its public roads for the two races, or to require cities to divide their streets, or even to require all white people to live in one particular portion of our cities and the colored people in the other portion, or if you please, in separate towns, as it would be to require separate coaches on the railroads. Lucas obviously thought he had produced an effect of fine irony by picturing such absurdities. Not apparent to him was another irony appreciated only by the modern reader. While the extreme of separate towns would never become widespread, the years immediately following his address would see the growth and hardening of residential segregation throughout the cities and towns of the South and the nation. Lucas next considered the objection to Negro cleanliness, which had been used as a supposed rationale for the separate coach proposal. In what may have been his most insightful observation, he denied that this was really an important factor. Instead, he alleged that the real purpose of the bill was permanently to fix his race in an inferior caste status. Noting a strange discrepancy among advocates on the point of Negro hygiene, Lucas caustically asked, "Is it true, as charged, that we use less of soap and God's pure water than other people, that has been sought to isolate us from other fellow citizens? It has been heralded to the world by those who would justify the Democratic Party of Arkansas and their platform of 1890 demanding separate coaches, that the Negro is not so clean and pleasant to the eye as he should be, but that some few other Negroes are less objectionable because refined, intelligent, and genteel. Why, some of our Democratic papers have said that the more money, intelligence, and gentility, the more objectionable the Negro. Which is the truth? Do our white friends demand this law that they may not be compelled to travel in the same car with the farmer class? Or it is the constant growth of a more refined, intelligent, and I might say a more perfumed class that grow more and more obnoxious as they more nearly approximate to our white friends' habits and plane of life. Indeed, complaints about African Americans on the railroads were ridiculous when one considered the close association of blacks and whites in other aspects of life. Senator Tillman had cited existing cases of separation to support his bill. Representative Lucas now noted the frequent examples of mixed contact as an argument against it. Who are employed as your servants throughout the South in preference and to the exclusion of every other class? Who is he that attends to the very delicate duties that bring persons in closer relations than any other, that sits by the side of yon delicate and refined white lady, laughing, chatting, covered by the same lapcloth? Who is the scraper of your chin, with his face and breath close as the lover's sign-like ballad? Why, I have heard many say that none but a Negro should shave them. How about those cooks who handle all that goes over your delicate palates, and the baker who is said to knead the dough with feet as with hands? How about those nurses that must sleep with the children, go traveling with you, occupy the room with you and the bed with your loved ones? Do you stand all this? And I have not half portrayed it. And yet you can't bear to ride upon the same car, though in a separate seat from your colored fellow citizen. It seems and must appear to every reasonable man to present a peculiar consistency, but consistency, thou art a jewel. The prime motive behind the separate coach initiative was not mere aversion to physical contact with blacks, but instead resentment against Negro social mobility and ultimately irrational sexual taboos and phobias about miscegenation and intermarriage. With almost acid contempt, Lucas mockingly assured his white auditors they need have no fears on this latter score. Alluding to past moral lapses by whites, he observed, "Out of a bounty of plenty of culture and refinement, we are satisfied and glad to wed amongst our own. For have we not samples of all complexions and features and texture of hair, if you please, that all the races afford, from the fair-haired daughter of the Caucasus to the raven-haired maid of voluptuous Spain? He or she among us must indeed be an epicure, that from our goodly quantity and from amongst our differing qualities may not find satisfaction. Rather," quote, "it is the dissatisfaction of some of our neighbors with their own, it would seem, that for their own restraint, which is not restraint, they must have laws to prevent this race antipathy of which they love to prate." Lucas proceeded to try and balance white fears of social equality and miscegenation with another fear, that of economic ruin. Passage of the coach bill would lead to a mass exodus of black laborers, he warned, with disastrous consequences to the economy of the state. Repeating lines from Oliver Goldsmith's poem, The Deserted Village, he warned employers that they would rue the day when, quote, "your fields have become deserted, your cabins left tenantless, and where the cotton and the corn were wont to grow in plenty and abundance, you find the jimson and the cucklebur growing in rank profusion over the once fertile fields and the cabin doors." Lucas ended his address on a conciliatory note, quoting from Longfellow's Hymn to the Night and the Book of Ruth in the Bible. He appealed for amity and goodwill between the races. However, he also issued a forthright challenge to the moral and ethical sensibilities of the white community. "I am not a white man," he declared, "but I here and now proclaim any man my inferior that ostracizes me because of my complexion or who measures my abilities by so shallow a criterion." It is noteworthy that the protest effort of Lucas and the other black leaders was fairly and fully reported in the capital city press. Although they disagreed with his stance concerning the separate coach bill, the Little Rock, Arkansas Gazette and Arkansas Democrat characterized Lucas as, quote, "a fluent debater, unquestionably the ablest and most brilliant representative of his race in the state, and it might truthfully be said for his age in the South, a born leader of his people." These are all quotes from the newspapers, for whom in 1891 there was, quote, "certainly a bright future in store." The Gazette devoted 3½ columns to its verbatim report of Lucas's speech, more space than was given to any other address delivered during the legislative session. The newspaper also gave front-page coverage of both of the Little Rock protest meetings. There had been 2 protest meetings held previously in the black community against the bill, relating the procedures of those meetings in detail and almost sympathetically. Nonetheless, nothing could alter the existing political realities. The bill had already passed the Senate. It became obvious that it was going to pass the House. An amendment was offered to the bill to extend segregation to urban streetcar systems. That would come later in 1903. but it was defeated. The amendment was defeated at this time. Representative Lucas engaged in the debate upon the amendment, and the discussion, the debate elicited this last sardonic comment from him. An amendment including streetcars was proposed, which brought Mr. Lucas to his feet, who made a speech in support of it. He said he knew the coach bill would pass and hoped it would be so amended as to give satisfaction to all classes of citizens. He did not want to associate with white people any more than they desired to associate with him. He would like to see separate coaches placed on all railroads, separate cars or partitions on all streetcar lines, and he would also be in favor of having streets and sidewalks divided by some line so that the colored people could go on one side and the white people on the other. He would like to see an end put to all intercourse between white and colored people by day and especially by night. You can see why this man is my hero here. Adoption of the separate coach law was a genuine watershed development in the ongoing story of Arkansas's race relations. Paradoxically, the device of separate coaches was itself new. The intent and purpose of the coach law was to preserve the old, to renew the ancient distinctions of caste, distinctions which were already beginning to decay in the states, cities, and towns. As Representative Lucas had himself put it during the House debates, we are opposed to the measure because it seeks to pander not to the convenience of the people, but to gratify and keep alive a prejudice among our citizens fast becoming extinct. The urban black middle class in Arkansas understood at once the true import and significance of the coach law and acted much in the fashion of W.E.B. Du Bois' talented 10th, galvanizing the black community into action and spearheading and articulating its demands. The race leaders moved with courage and resolution and certainly deserve to be remembered for their stand. Yet, in the immediate pragmatic sense, their effort accomplished little. It may even have been counterproductive. During the protests, some country editors were incensed by the meetings of what one of them characterized as the colored ladies and gentlemen of Little Rock. And one editor predicted that their actions would only serve to hasten the passage of the separate coach bill. Thus, despite well-organized black resistance, Arkansas determined to board the Jim Crow car and begin a journey into the past. For Arkansas's African Americans, the mournful cries of the train whistles in 1891 were both reminders of times gone before and omens of things to come. Lucas basically, I should mention that the same legislature that passed the separate coach law in 1891 also adopted a series of disfranchisement measures that basically excluded poor and illiterate people, both white and black, from the polls. These measures, a poll tax, an election law that gave the Democratic Party total control over the election machinery and effectively drove illiterates, both races, out of the election process, had devastating consequences. Basically, within 4 years' time, the total vote in Arkansas declined by 1/3. Following the session of 1893 and lasting till 1973, for the next 80 years, not one single African American was served in the Arkansas General Assembly, the legislative branch of Arkansas state government. Representative Lucas clearly saw the handwriting on the wall. In the 1880s, he had praised in his interview with the Boston Daily Globe, he had praised Arkansas for its liberal public sentiment regarding race. Now everything had changed. By 1893, he had left Arkansas and relocated in Chicago, where he established a lucrative law practice conducted from his spacious suite of offices at 88 Dearborn Avenue in the downtown Chicago Loop. He gained a reputation as an expert in criminal law. He was co-counsel with Clarence Darrow, the famous criminal attorney, on one occasion. And on 4 occasions, Lucas appeared before the United States Supreme Court. By the early 20th century, the local Chicago African-American press was referring to him as the black millionaire lawyer John Gray Lucas. He became active in local politics and obtained appointments as assistant corporation counsel and a recorder of deeds in Cook County. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, like so many African Americans, he left the Republican Party and became a Democrat. In 1934, he was appointed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt assistant United States Attorney in Cook County, a position he was still holding in the year of his death, 1943. I was born in 1942, so he was actually still alive during the first year of my life. He died in Chicago and was buried in the city's Lincoln Cemetery. I was able to visit his gravesite with Dr. Guerrero here this summer, and was survived by his wife, Oliver Gulliver Lucas, and his daughter, Elaine Louise Lucas Henderson. Basically, Lucas's life was emblematic of broad changes in patterns of race relations occurring in Arkansas and the South during the latter half of the 19th century. From the end of the Civil War until the early 1890s, African Americans could obtain an education and then enter politics as independent, forthright champions of their race's interests. After that point, as historian J. Morgan Kauser has observed, quote, most blacks would have to immigrate to the North, choose other professions, or settle for the role of white-appointed race leader with all the constraints that role imposed on their statements and actions. Lucas's decision to move from Pine Bluff to Chicago in 1893 was understandable. For an intelligent, articulate, and militant black leader like himself, Arkansas had ceased to be a land of opportunity. Thank you.
My name is Agnolia Gay. I am an educator with the Little Rock School District. I also just started, I'm sponsoring a radio show with teenagers. And if Mr. Lucas had family that still lives in Arkansas, that would be a wonderful opportunity to interview family members.
Well, that's an excellent question. I asked that myself. I was in Chicago for almost 2 weeks this summer doing research, primarily on Lucas, and I went to the Newberry Library to check the microfilm copies of the Chicago Defender, which is the leading black newspaper in Chicago. And I was hoping maybe I could find at least maybe 10 or 15 references. I, typed in his name and during my search, and I think 1,300 references to him appeared from the Chicago Defender. So I have lots of research to still do. It's interesting to note, though, I found out after he moved to Illinois, a bill was introduced in the Illinois legislature in 1913 to require segregation on urban streetcar systems in Illinois, and also on the passengers, the Pullman cars, the sleeping cars on the passenger trains, and he led a delegation from Chicago down to Springfield, the state capital, and it must have been given him great satisfaction. He prevented the enactment of that law. I put an ad in the Chicago Defender and saying, are you related to John Gray Lucas, or do you know him at all? I did receive one response from a woman who, from the Lucas family in southeast Arkansas, and apparently there is a large African-American family. She didn't know, she thought it was very possible her family might be related, but she didn't know of any direct connection. His son, John Gray Lucas Jr., died. I found this out this summer doing research in the Chicago Defender, but he died, unfortunately, when he was a little boy, like I think 4 or 5 years old, something like that. His daughter did, outlive him. This is the saddest thing of all. I went to the Lincoln Cemetery. He was buried, and the people there were very nice. We did locate his burial plot. He, his wife, and his daughter are all there buried together in an unmarked grave. So I'm going to make sure, I'm going to bring a proposal before the Black History Commission to try to correct that.